As you know, I think that we're not going to vote or reform or legislate our way out of the current problems that we're facing, particularly the problem of demographic invasion. I think we are going to collapse our way out of these problems. And the scale of the task that's ahead of us, I think I can best illustrate by saying that on the basis that 20% of any group provide 80% of the benefits, I think that means that we need to repatriate all but 20% of 20% of 20% of the demographic invasion that has occurred into our country since at least the start of the Blair years in '97, perhaps as far back as Enoch Powell's speech in '68. And 20% of 20% of 20% is a bit under 1%. So basically a 99% repatriation task ahead of us. I think we have a realistic chance of achieving that, but not through legislation, not through voting, but through collapse. I think what will happen is that we'll see a financial collapse. The finances won't stack up anymore. The debt bubble will burst. Government finances will break down, and that will mean that the welfare state breaks down, because I hate to be the one to break it to you, but when the government hasn't got any money, it can't pay money for welfare. And that means hospitals closing, dole money doesn't get paid, rent subsidy doesn't get paid, all kinds of welfare payments, government payments simply cease. And I think we will react the same way that, say, a Latin American or African basket case reacts when the bread subsidy ceases and the bread price goes up. The authority of the state collapses and you go into a vicious spiral where the state can't afford to pay for welfare, and then people stop respecting the authority of the state. As a result of that, the state can't pull in money, so it's even less able to pay for welfare, and respect for the state goes down even further until the state just falls over because no one has any regard for it anymore. I think that is coming. I think out of that, what you will get is, that polity, that system, I think, will therefore collapse. Out of that, I think you will get a new system because people need order, and I think that new system will be based on, it will be sort of predicated upon the enforcement of law, and enforceable not because people vote for it with ballot papers, but because people vote for it with their feet, individually deciding whether or not they want to join it. Basically a kind of a self-government type of system. I think that's what's coming. And when that happens, I think you will see a very hard separation along ethnic lines. People won't trust people from different ethnicities to help them with their safety, to help them ensure their safety. And I think as a result of that, we will see gradually the rollback and the pushback of invading the demographic invasion. I think then we have a chance to do it humanely by those invading populations finding themselves separated out, cut off, and living in very bad circumstances, and then being amenable to the idea of a free plane ticket home. I think what is necessary for us to do at the moment is to think through how we can accomplish that massive repatriation of millions and millions of people, I would say tens of millions of people, and to do it reasonably humanely. I don't think governments can do it. I don't think they can make a start to do it. What they can do is shed a lot of blood, which is not really an effective method. That's not what we want to achieve. So that's what I think is likely to happen. Now, what I hear is, what I've heard for years, decades, is people saying, oh, don't worry, people have had enough of this, the tide's turning, people are changing, we're going to vote in a different government soon, Nigel Farage will sort it out, Brexit will sort it out, the Conservative Party is going to change, you wait, someone else is going to come in, and we'll get a really tough government with a lot of backbone, a lot of spine. They will really start sorting the problem out. No, wrong answer, not going to happen. But what I need to do is, and part of the reason for this video, is to look at what I think people are going to be referring to. That kind of bulldog or civic nationalist and bulldog Union Jack waving patriot, I think is going to be coming up pretty soon saying, look at Reform UK. They're doing well in the polls. They're going to get control of things, and then everything will change for the better. No, won't happen. That's partly what I want to go through now, because if I go through this briefly, if you can see this, that's from Wikipedia. that is a summary of all the general election opinion polls. What you see there is Labour. Let me zoom in a bit. That's Labour there, Conservatives there, and you see Lib Dems there, Reform, Greens and SNP. I'll zoom out a bit. Labour are on about 45% and the Tories are on about 25%. But the up-and-coming party is Reform. They're on a steady wave up. They're somewhere between 9 and 11%, around 10%. And what you saw up until the end of the last year, that the Tories and Labour going down, Reform picking up those votes from both parties. Since then, Labour's Conservatives have flatlined, Labour have gone back up again, but Labour haven't clawed back those votes from Reform. Reform looks like it's still going up. They've clawed back those votes from the Lib Dems and the Greens, and possibly a little bit the SNP. So Reform, the Reform UK, Richard Tice's party, they are, I can't deny, they are doing well at the moment. If they continue, if that line continues up, they could, and the Tories continue to go down, then Reform could be a threat to the Tories. It could be, by the time of the next election, they could be hot on the heels of the Tory party. I don't think Reform actually will get anyone elected at the next election, but I don't know. It's early days yet. That they might do. They're doing okay. So I want to address the rise of Reform UK, because I think that's the one that people are going to latch on to when people say what I think people want to say, which is, oh, I cannot bear the idea of the state going down. It's unthinkable to me. It's like the sky falling on my head. I don't want to think about it. So I will clutch at any party which I think is going to reform out of it. And what better party than Reform to promise to do that? Now, before I do that, I want to give you a little bit of background, because I'm saying Reform won't do it. We won't reform our way out of it. We will collapse our way out of it. Well, how close? How is the collapse coming along? Well, it's coming along very steadily, slowly, but steadily. Thank you. Let me go back here and I'll show you this tab. That is from the UK Parliament. That shows total government spending as a proportion of GDP. It's about 46%. So that's about as pretty much as high as it's been for a very long time, really since World War II. It got as high as that during, around that point, the high point of the financial crisis of 2008-2009, and it was also about as high as that in 1976 when Britain had to go to the IMF for a bailout. Those were the two big crises of about the last 50 years, economic crises. We're at that point with government spending without a crisis. So that's government spending. Now, the next one then is government debt. Let me look at that one. That's from the Office for National Statistics. And the main points. UK general government debt was, that was £2.6 trillion at the end of Q2 of 2023, 101% of GDP. I think it's actually a lot bigger than that. I would say it's much bigger than that, because that doesn't take into account what's owed under private finance initiative, where you basically get the private sector to build a hospital and then you rent it off them at exorbitant rates. And it doesn't include public sector pensions. That's about the total debt for public sector pensions, people who work for the state, is about 2.5 trillion, 2.5 trillion. And I think it's about 2.5 trillion for outstanding on state pensions. So, but the official figure, the headline figure, that is 100% of GDP, that's debt. But that might be the headline figure. That's not the sore point number. The sore point number, the number that counts, that is the deficit. And I'll tell you why in a second. The UK general government deficit, or net borrowing, that was 63.5 billion in Q2 of 2023, and that is the equivalent of 9.5% of GDP. Remember that number. Q2 of 2023. It's so April, May and June of 2023. The deficit, the credit card debt for those three months was 9.5% of GDP. Now, it is the deficit that is important. That's the number that matters, because not the total amount of debt. Historically, if you look at the fall of the Soviet Union, if you look at the turmoil in Latin American states that kept dropping like flies and getting up again and dropping again during 1980s in Latin America, and also the collapse of Central European states in the middle of the last century, mainly due to inflation. The key to it is that when the deficit, the annual deficit reaches 20% of GDP, that's when states become ungovernable. That's when they start to fall over. They can't fund things, they can't raise money, they can't borrow money, they start going broke, interest rates rise and the system collapses. That's the point at which things collapse. Now, we are at the moment, if I go back to there, so we're at the moment in Q2 of 2023, that was at 9.5%. Now, what you might say is, well, that's only halfway there. There's a long way to go. Yeah, there's a lot of room to play with. Well, I don't think that is the case, because if you get a credit crunch, then what you have is a very fast increase in the deficit. Now, this is from a BBC story saying that UK borrowing was going down. The reason I'm quoting this table is because it shows it nice and clearly, and that's based on ONS stats. And what it shows is between 2007 and 2009, the deficit, the annual deficit, went from about 43 billion pounds right up to about 100, that looks like 152, 153. Basically, it went up about 3.5 times. So in 1 year, it went up about 2.5 times. Then it went up a bit more to 3.5 times, and then it started coming down. Now, if that, hold on, if I do this, if that figure, 9.5% of GDP, if that goes up, if we have another credit crunch and that goes up 3.5 times, you're looking at it going up within a year to about 24%, then in another year basically up to about 33%. Either of those numbers, I think, is enough to collapse the system. The deficit gets to basically 25 to 35% of GDP. That's lights out. That's when government goes broke, welfare state goes bust, everyone gets angry, riots in the street, government falls over, and then that is the collapse. And then we have the chance to rebuild along the lines that I think we will do, which is forms of self-government where people opt in and out of law. That is what I think is happening. And I think we are, the figures show that we are closer to that than you might think. It is coming along very steadily. Now, I don't think that we can, there's any room for manoeuvre out of that. The tax burden is also, like government spending, the tax burden is at a record high. It's the highest since at least 1948. This is from Sky News. This, if I just go up there, that's the key economic graphs that define 2023. So if I go back down to here, I mean, it's solid, pretty much solid bad news. And in 1948, in case you can't remember, we'd just come out of World War II. We had huge debts to pay off, and also we're trying to finance this newfangled thing called the NHS. So tax rates were really, really high, and we are at least, we're actually a bit higher than that. I think total tax burden is about 37.5% and rising. So there isn't the room. My point is, there isn't the room to get out of the economic hole we're in. We can't we can't increase taxes. There isn't room for that. There isn't room to increase spending. The deficit, the borrowing is already really high. I think it is dangerously high at the moment, even though it's only at half right now, at half the point it needs to be if the state is to collapse. But it is at a dangerous point without room for manoeuvre. So that's the position we're in. Are we likely, can we reform our way out of it? Well, this guy here thinks that we can. This gentleman is Richard Tice. Now, he's the leader of Reform UK. Excuse me. I want to go through some of their policies to show that although they're going up in the polls, I think that Reform UK, their policies enhance my point. They prove my point that we are not going to reform our way out of it. I think reform will collapse us in the way that medieval doctors killed you. The illness didn't kill you. The medieval doctors kill you. I think Reform are like all the other politicians. They're all a bunch of medieval doctors. And I think Reform will collapse us faster than the other parties. But I'll go through that in a minute. What I want to do is give you a little bit of background on Richard Tice, because I find him peculiarly unimpressive on the issue. He's talking here about the rubber dinghy invasion, the small boats. And I want to go through this, because what I think he's saying is either I think he's lying, or he's just being sort of a slack-jawed talker, just wanting to say whatever people want to hear. Now, give me a second.
Their issue, and here's the thing: I've read the international treaties. Under existing international laws, you can do what I have suggested. You can safely pick up and take back to the point of departure.
So you don't think we could be accused of breaking the law and face the mother of all court cases?
I've read the rules. I can tell you, I would get some decent lawyers who believe in the cause of sovereign borders, right, secure borders, and we would say, under the existing international treaties, we are within the law. Yes, the French are going to be a bit grumpy for a couple of weeks.
Can you return people without the support of the French?
You can, under existing...
Without conducting a war with Emmanuel Macron?
I promise you, under existing international treaties, right, the Safety of Life at Sea Act 1974, the UN Convention Law of Sea Act 1980, right, you can do this. I've read it.
Are you
I know it's right.
This isn't snake oil, because many people will say, of course Richard Tice will say that, he's never going to become Prime Minister, but he's going to throw us some red meat. He said...
Okay, Richard Tice has read the treaties, and he promises you that he can do them. He can send those rubber dinghy invaders straight back to France. No, this is nonsense. I think he's making a fool of himself on this point. I want to deal with this briefly because I think it illustrates the kind of character we're dealing with. If I go here to he talked about two conventions. He actually referred to them as acts. One of them is the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea Act, and then the other one I think was this one, and that is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea Act. No. These are not acts. An act is an act of Parliament. That is a law that Parliament passes saying do this or you get punished, we'll do this to you. A convention is something different. It's a written document that, say, the UN or the International Maritime Organization draws up, and then states go and sign. They sign up to it. They say, yes, we will obey this. And it's what's sometimes referred to as soft law. It's enforced through embarrassment, because they know that the politicians and presidents and prime ministers, they care more about what their opposite numbers think, what they think of each other, than what their voters think of them. And that's how it gets enforced, through the power of class, vanity and embarrassment. And so I want to talk about the I'll talk first about this, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. This has nothing to do with the rubber dinghy invasion, and it certainly doesn't enable us to push back the boats. This is their web page, and it says the SOLAS Convention in its successive forms is generally regarded as the most important of all international treaties concerning the safety of merchant ships. That's the first point. The rubber dinghy invasion, that's not about merchant ships. They carry no cargo anyone wants. It doesn't apply. And the second thing is, if you look at this is the text of that that convention. That's the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, 1974, etc. If you go down to Article 2, what it says is the present convention shall apply to ships entitled to fly the flag of states, the governments of which are contracting governments. Now, the rubber dinghy invaders are not entitled to fly the flag of France. They're not registered as French ships. They're not sailing under the flag of France. They're not entitled to fly that flag. It doesn't cover them. It was never intended to do so. And the third thing is that there is under this that Safety of Life at Sea Convention, there is no enforcement mechanism, certainly no enforcement mechanism that would entitle us to say you invaders in your rubber dinghy was unsafe, therefore we're going to punish France by sending you back to France. The way it works is you take a ferry for a holiday to France, and let's suppose your ferry is unsafe, and the French, when it gets there, the French find out that it was unsafe. The French inform the British and say, hey, you've got to prosecute this ferry company because they're operating unsafe boats, and you've signed this convention saying that you will regulate your boats to make sure they're safe. What they couldn't do is say to you, hey, you travelled over here on that boat, and we're going to send you back to Britain in order to punish Britain for allowing an unsafe ferry company to operate. It's nonsense. That just, I don't know what he thinks he's talking about. Now, the next one is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and that is this one there. This one, I think that this UN convention proves my point even more strongly. He just doesn't know what he's talking about. The Convention on the Law of the Sea, that shows why we can't return the boats. So if I go down a bit, I'm looking at the Wikipedia page because it's convenient, it saves time. That map there, let me enlarge that. That is that. What it says is what is outlined by that UN convention. And what it says is that it regulates, it defines territorial borders. And what it says is that 12 nautical miles, that's 14 driving miles, like land miles, car miles, 12 nautical miles out from the coast, that is what's called territorial waters. That is, so 12 miles north of the French coast, it's as if you are still standing on French soil underneath the Eiffel Tower. And 12 miles south of the English coast, 12 nautical miles, 14 car miles south, it's as if you are on English land standing next to Nelson's Column. And the point is, if I show you this map here, that illustrates that green bit there, that illustrates that 12 nautical mile zone outside of France, outside of Britain. What you see is there's quite a long bit, the thin bit of the channel there, there's quite a long zone. That's where, because it's the shortest patch of sea, that is where all the rubber dinghy invaders come across. And there is, at that point there, you go direct from French territorial waters, as if you're standing on French soil, into British territorial waters, as if you're standing on British soil, and there is no intervening international waters. So what that means is you have, let's say, illegal invaders into France that France doesn't know about, that they're gathering, and they, under the radar, they get out of France and they decide to leave France, and they get out of French territory, out of French waters, into British waters. They've left France. They have no right to come back to France, and Britain has no right to force them to go back to France. If we were to force them back, that would be the same as people smuggling, as if we were taking people from any other person who's outside of France, someone from Moscow or Mombasa, and forcing them back into France against their will. That would be people smuggling. The French would have the right to sink our boats. They'd have the right to stop them. It probably wouldn't go that far, but it would be an international incident. There would be legal proceedings against Britain. France could simply bar it, and they should have the right to do that. We should not expect France to do our dirty work. If we should sort out our own immigration problems. I think the only way you're going to sort out the problem of the rubber dinghy invasion, the only way that I can see, is by waiting for the boats to come into British waters and then sinking those boats, letting everyone drown. You'll have to do it very consistently, but you won't have to do it very often, because people will quickly get the message and they'll realise it's lethal. I'm sure to die. I won't do it. I hate to talk that kind of talk, but if you can find a better way, please put it in the comments below. But I think that's the only way. You're not going to do it by packing them back off to France. France just won't let them in. It doesn't have to. My point is that Richard Tice here, looking pretty with his nice floppy hairstyle, isn't he nice, isn't he impressive, wagging his finger, does not know what he is talking about on this point. He's talking nonsense. This is the kind of man who I suspect had a big hand in drafting the manifesto for the Reform Party. And what is the manifesto for the Reform Party? Let me show you this. I'll go right up to the top so you can see it there. Hold on. Reform is essential. There you are. Let's make Britain great again. Okay, there you go. Now I'll go back down again and go back to page 6. Basically, the the policy of the policy of Reform UK is cut taxes and increase spending. The very thing which I said previously back here, the thing that I said we couldn't do when I showed you that total government spending, total deficits, and total tax take. That is what we can't afford to do. Let me bring that up there. Now, this is the emergency recovery plan. I think it will create a bigger crisis than the crisis that Liz Truss's tax cuts created. It should be obvious after her that you can't just cut taxes. The markets will have a fit. Now, this is the emergency recovery plan. That means it will be done immediately, very fast, just like Liz Truss did. Emergency recovery plan creates faster growth. This is to increase growth by 0.5% per annum. Wow, that is worth having. So he's going to free up 6 million people from paying income tax by lifting the minimum threshold to £20,000 from £12,500. Now there are 30,000, a bit over 30,000 income taxpayers. So what they're saying is that'll be £1,500 per person. 30 million times 1.5 thousand. That is, I make it 45 trillion. That's just on that one tax cut. And then the problem with that is, you might say, well, it's good, we want to reduce taxes on the lower paid. That seems like a good thing. The problem with that is, and I want to show you this, this is a table from the BBC. When you reduce taxes at the lower end, you increase the proportion of taxes that are paid by people higher up the scale. And that makes it more in the interest of more people to vote for more tax and spend. That increases the tax and spend ratchet. I want to show you this it's from a BBC news page. The figures come from HMRC. What it shows is who pays what tax. Basically, the top hold on, give me a second. The top 50% pay 91% of income tax. The top 10% pay about 62% of all income tax. The top 1% pay about 31% of all income tax. What that means, sort of rough and dirty, what that means is there is, at any stage, there is about I would say about a 10-to-1 ratio where more tax and spend is a good economic calculation. You get out more than you put in. It gets rinsed through a very inefficient state mechanism, but that's the basic maths. For every one person who loses, there are 10 people who gain from more tax and spend. That is the one graph you need to understand why we are where we are. That explains the tax and spend ratchet constantly going up and up and up. And so what you get is, and that explains the historical move from the establishment of the state then to the democratic state, because it's more stable. When you have democracy, you will then get a welfare state, and eventually the welfare will get so big through that tax and spend ratchet that it collapses the state. And that is what I'm saying is going to happen. And that means that you need to be very careful when you are doing what Richard Tice is doing here, saying I'm going to take people who earn less, up to £20,000, or I'm going to increase the basic rate threshold from 12.5 to £20,000. That's 45 billion a year. And then it's going to free up 1.2 million small businesses from paying corporation tax by lifting the threshold to 100,000, scrap VAT on energy bills, scrap environmental levies, lower fuel duty by 20 pence a litre, and lower VAT from 20% to 18%. Now, what he seems to be implying is that I think the idea is that this will cost 85 billion, and that 85 billion, where's that going to come from? I hear you cry as if with one voice. Okay, wasteful government spending. They're going to save £5 in every £100, and that will save £50 billion per year. Yeah, this is what every government says they're going to. Every government says, don't worry, we'll pay for it by cutting waste. And then they find it's really that they can't do it. No government ever does it. Of course they would. It's a lot easier than raising taxes. They end up having to raise taxes. I don't think that's going to happen. He doesn't say what waste he's going to cut. He's just, maybe he's a bit more big, macho, and a bit better looking, a bit more finger wagging than everyone else, and he's got more backbone, and Reform UK can do it. And then enable well over 1 million people out of the over 5 million people out of work back into jobs. I think this is more of what is already tried. There was a scandal with that, I think during the Blair years and the Cameron years, with, I think it was Action for Employment. I think there was an investigation into fraud and mismanagement. There's something about, I think, it cost £200 million, I think, and people said that it achieved nothing. What it does achieve is you can nag people back into a job temporarily. They then find they're not really much better off, so they go back on the dole. And it may get people off the long-term unemployed list. It doesn't help government finances because people don't stay in those jobs for very long. And the third one is to end the tax benefits to renewable energy industry, and finally remove vast swathes of unnecessary regulations that hinder growth. Well, it doesn't say what they are. Okay, and if we go over here a bit, this one I think, again, I think he just doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is reorganising the quantitative easing debt. And what he's saying is, well, if I explain the quantitative easing debt, what that is the Bank of England puts money into the economy by buying up government bonds, effectively lending money to the state, perhaps doing it via banks who buy those bonds from the government, from the Treasury, and then the Bank of England buys those bonds from the banks. And so effectively the government owes the Bank of England money, and also the government has to pay interest on that loan to the Bank of England. And what he's saying is we're going to reorganise that debt so that it doesn't, to cut the amount of interest that the government has to pay to the Bank of England. What he doesn't, I wonder if he should know this, but that money, what the Bank of England does is it takes that interest and it may keep some of it to make sure that it has a buffer of reserves, money in the kitty. Once it gets up to a certain level, it's referred to as the ceiling, it remits 100% of that interest payment back to the state. So the state pays the Bank of England. If the Bank of England is at that ceiling, all that money goes back to the state. If it's below that ceiling, it remits 50% of that interest back to the government. So I know he says here that it's a fixed notional interest rate, but it's not going to save the state any money. It's a paper, an accounting exercise, and I think it's a dangerous one. What he's saying is that debt that the Bank of England holds from the state, from the Treasury, I think that's usually in 10-year Treasury bonds. What he will do is he will unilaterally rearrange that to say, no, it's not repayable over 10 years, that's repayable over 75 years, and the interest rate is now fixed forever at a notional interest rate of 2%. That is as if you had a personal loan from your bank, and you went to your bank and you said, you know the money you lent me, thanks very much for that. You know I said I'd repay it in 10 years' time, well I won't. It's going to be over 75 years now, and you know that 5% interest rate I said I'd pay, tough, it's going to be 2% from now on. How many banks do you think would be prepared to lend to you after that? Now, the second thing about that is that looks like where he's saying we would reorganise the Bank of England internal quantitative easing debt into a 75-year wartime-like Corona bond with a fixed notional interest rate of 2%. That actually is halfway towards what is called monetising debt, where you a state says we're broke, we're just going to print money and spray it out just to pay, just printing and spending money. It's not going completely down that line, but it's going halfway down that road by saying we're going to halve the interest rates and we're going to really put it on the never never, 75 years away. The markets will respond to that as if the British government is going, not only as the markets will say it's dangerous to lend to a government that does this, they will also say this is a government that looks like it's prone to printing and spending, because if it's doing that this time, it will do itself a favour like that again. The result of that is that it will be harder for the British government to borrow, interest rates will go up, and the British government will have even less money to spend, and it will have to put up taxes even more, and will have less to spend on welfare. Now the next thing they say they're going to give us is 0 waiting lists, and again quickly that is 3 days to see a GP. If you can't see a GP within 3 days, then you get a voucher to go private elsewhere. If you can't see a consultant within 3 weeks, get a voucher to go private elsewhere. If you can't get an operation within 9 weeks from day one, you get a voucher to go elsewhere. That is a big commitment. I think it's about 6.5 million people are on waiting lists, and the average waiting list is about 14.5 weeks. I think it's about 3.2 or 3.5 million people are on an 18-week waiting list for an operation. Now what, if I go on to this tab, this is how they say they're going to achieve it. And it talks about social care staff, 1.25 million people they're going to employ. They're going to employ 150,000 more social care and healthcare staff, frontline staff, but no more managers to manage them, so no more people doing payroll, staff discipline, organising them. They're just going to take on all those extra staff. And the way they're going to entice more staff in is by cutting taxes for them. They're going to say that 1.25 million people with a 25,000 average salary in social care, they will be taken out of basic rate income tax. They will effectively pay no income tax. The same with healthcare staff. People with an average salary of 34,000, they'll be taken out of basic rate income tax. And now and also 150,000 more people taken on. They calculate that will be between 9 and 10 billion per year. I think it'll be a lot more than that. I can see how those numbers add up, but I think that's unrealistic. I think it could be twice as much as that in reality, because you are going to have to employ managers. I think the tax bill is going to be higher. I think people are going to demand much higher wages than they expect here. And they also say that those extra healthcare vouchers, that will cost 9 billion there. Now, by my maths, 9 to 10 billion plus 9 billion is 18 to 19 billion, but they seem to think it'll come to 15 billion. I'm not quite sure how that adds up. That smells of optimism to me. So you've got a lot of tax cuts, and that's a lot of increased spending, which is going to come out of cutting waste somewhere and cutting regulations somewhere, none of which is specified. I don't think they're going to save any money by cutting waste and regulations, and I think this extra spending is going to come to a lot of money, and I think that will cause a meltdown far faster than Liz Truss's meltdown. So my point there is that the rise of Reform UK in the polls there, that is not a sign that we are getting our collective sense back, and that we're now going to finally have a chance of getting a truly conservative government in place that will wave the flag and stand up and sort out our problems. I think it's the opposite. I think it means that we are more likely to face collapse. I think it will bring on Reform UK. If they get into power, they will bring on collapse sooner, and I think it makes it more likely that we will collapse our way out of the problem. If I was the sort of person who would vote, I don't think I am, well, I'm not, then I think I would vote for Reform, precisely because I think they're more likely to lead to collapse, which I think is what we need. Okay, so just finally, what are Reform UK saying about immigration? Yes, they are saying border control and net zero immigration. Let's welcome in those who have high-level skills and talents that we need, such as doctors, engineers, software developers, scientists and surgeons. Yeah, where have we heard that before? Yeah, and also care workers and nursing staff. Anyway, so not those high-value, higher rate taxpayers that they seem to be focusing on there. in tightly controlled numbers that meet our requirements. Net zero immigration means that the number illegally allowed to enter to live and work in the UK each year should equal the number emigrating, so the overall population remains approximately the same. Again, this isn't nationalism. I don't think it's even particularly patriotic. It's just saying, for some reason, we have the optimum number of people in our country. We want to freeze it where it is now. That satisfies nothing. That's pretense. That's lies. Okay. So what he then says is that approximately some 400,000 people leave every year. No, that is not the case. If I go here, let's look at the numbers. This is from the ONS. What that says is provisional estimate of long-term immigration for the year ending June 2023 was 1.2 million, while emigration was 508,000. So what is being said here by about 400,000 a year leaving? No, it's 508,000. So what Reform UK are saying is they're happy with over 500,000 people, foreigners, invaders, coming into our country every year. That's 10 times the level when Enoch Powell gave his warning. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with 500,000 people? That's not far off 1% replacement a year. I'm not okay. I don't think that's okay. I don't think that's a remotely patriotic position to hold. So again, Reform may collapse us out of our current problems. They're not going to reform us out of the current problems. Now, I should point out one final thing. Now, these ONS stats, 1.2 million coming in to the year ending June 2023. I don't think that's the case. If I look here, again from this government's figures, what they show here. Let me just go back up to the top. What they say there is that, and they deal with the numbers coming in under work visas including dependents. I think that number there doesn't include dependents. Work visas including dependents. So if you get a work visa to come to Britain, you can bring your family in. That was 538,000, nearly 539,000. And study visas including dependents. So if you come and study in Britain, you can bring your members of your family in as well. 657,000. That alone is near the 1.2 million mark. And then you have various other numbers. You have family reunification, that's 75,000. You have people who are granted protection, that's 175,000. That takes it up to about a bit over or 1. That takes it up to about 1.45. I reckon the total number is probably a bit over 1.5 million who came in the year up to June 2023. So he is not saying, this fella Richard Tice is not saying how he is going to get us back down to that figure of, well, he says 400,000, 500,000 a year. That's basically cutting it by a million, particularly when he wants to bring in so many, or when he wants to recruit so many social care workers and healthcare workers. Currently, the government justifies levels of mass immigration on the basis that we're poaching healthcare workers from other countries. So that's the point I'm making. I think the collapse is coming along steadily. It's coming along very nicely. Thank you. Don't be discouraged. The sky will fall on our heads soon, and the humanitarian need for civil collapse is going to be met before too long, i.e. another decade. You've got another decade of misery to go through until you get the horror of civil collapse. But out of that, I think we will get a better system without the welfare state. I hate to break it to you, but you'll be happy without it, I think. And don't be fooled in the meantime by this. The opinion polls showing Reform catching up with the Tories. They may well catch up with the Tories by the time of the next election. That simply means that I will be able to say, I told you so, ever more loudly. We are going to collapse our way out of this and not reform our way out of it. And Reform UK enhance my point there. Thank you very much.